Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Lisa Hanselman. I'm the director of the Mountaineer Parents Club here at West Virginia University, and we are very excited to bring you this presentation this evening. So we will go ahead and get started. Please hold your questions till the end, and once we have finished the presentation, you'll be able to drop your questions in the chat, and we will answer them live on the webinar. But we ask you to hold off because honestly, presentation might go ahead and answer those questions for you. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our friends at the WVU Hub.
I'll start off. My name's Eric Meadows, and I've been in what we would call the financial aid industry for 26 years, and just moved over to the WVU Hub a couple of years ago. And very excited to be here today. We're going to talk a little bit about financial aid for West Virginia residents, which is really important. I think that we want to make sure that our residents understand what aid could be available to them for next year. And so really excited to talk about that today. And I'll turn it over to George to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Again, thanks for attending this evening. My name is George Yanchek. I'm the director of the WVU Hub. The WVU Hub has been in operation since the end of the 2015 year. We have been able to help a lot of students, and we are here to help you with your questions, the student, the parent, whatever questions you may have about the number of offices that we represent. So again, we want to thank you for being here this evening and learning more about the types of financial aid that we offer.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Bullinger, and I am a student financial coordinator in the Hub, and just always grateful to be a part of the opportunity to share with what Lisa and her team does. It's so important for you to have all the information as you plan ahead as time goes quickly, and we look forward to helping with the questions that you have this evening.
All right, thank you. So I'll go ahead and get started and jump into this. As mentioned, we're going to talk about financial aid for West Virginia residents. But first of all, we want to kind of talk a little bit about what we do in the WVU Hub. And basically, we are what you would call a one-stop shop for many different offices. I think it's a really good thing when a university is able to connect different offices into one place, so students don't have to go in a million different directions to get their questions answered. And so that's kind of what the WVU Hub does. It's not the only thing we do, but we do answer a lot of questions for different offices. And so what our office does is helps you navigate your way through student accounts and billing, financial aid, which includes scholarships, federal work-study employment. So that is actually a financial aid program where students can actually earn money, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and help pay for expenses. Academic records through the registrar. So if you're needing assistance, trying to navigate through that. And just recently, we added admissions to a part of our office. And so we are able to help students navigate through all of the questions you have for all the different offices that you might be working with as your time at WVU as a student. And so we really like to help people. We like to try to solve their problems and help them navigate through that so that they can actually get their education at WVU. And so that's what our office is really here for. It was put in place, as George said, a few years back, and we've really gotten to the point where we have a lot of experts within our office that can answer your questions. So a lot of you are probably asking, how am I going to hear from the WVU Hub? And the primary way we are able to communicate with students is through email. And for those parents that might be on here or listening to the recording, we cannot send an email to the parent. It has to go to the student. And so every student that's admitted to WVU is given an email account through WVU. We call it the mix email. And so whenever you receive an email or that student receives an email from the Hub, it's going to be extremely important. So we ask that they make sure that they read and stay on top of their email from the WVU Hub. You can actually connect that to a mobile device, but we would actually recommend making sure that they are checking their mix email periodically and making sure they stay on top of those emails. The students also, once they are admitted, get access to the WVU portal. and the billing account information. So they do have access to go in and check in on the WVU portal. They can check different accounts, including financial aid and their WVU My account, which is where all their billing information is stored. Okay, so we're talking about financial aid for West Virginia residents. The very first gateway to applying for financial aid is the free application for federal student aid. We refer to it as the FAFSA, and that is really the main thing that a student needs to do every year, and make sure that you are doing that by the deadline, which we'll discuss later. The FAFSA is actually determining eligibility for multiple types of awards. That includes all federal awards, which would be their grants, federal work study, direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans. And then there's also an application for most state financial aid programs as well. And so just remember that the FAFSA is even though you may think you're not going to qualify for aid, we still recommend that families fill that out every year because you just don't know what you're going to qualify from year to year. The other thing that we are going to require for an award that we just created was called the WVU Guarantee. So you do have to submit the FAFSA to qualify for the WVU Guarantee. In addition to that, it may be required for some other institutional funds, and maybe private or external aid, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. It has to be submitted for most of the aid programs that we award to students. We need that FAFSA. And so I would recommend it to fill it out every year. It's actually gotten simpler, believe it or not. They did a FAFSA simplification, which was not simple last year, but it's gotten a lot better this year. And they've actually simplified the FAFSA. It doesn't take as long to fill it out. And I encourage all families to submit a FAFSA on a yearly basis. So in order to fill out the FAFSA, all contributors have to have an FSA ID. And so you will have to go into the state aid or the federal aid website. It's studentaid.gov, and you have to have a username and a password created for the FSA online systems. And the one thing I will point out is if you want to submit a FAFSA right now, in order to do that, you have to have an FSA ID created. It usually takes about 3 days for that to happen. So give yourself 3 days leeway if you are starting the FAFSA right now and don't have an FSA ID. But this does serve as your legal signature for any online applications for federal aid. So go out and if you haven't filled the FAFSA out, we're going to talk about contributors here in a second. But all contributors that are going to be completing information on the FAFSA, go out tonight and get that FSA ID created so you can get that FAFSA submitted. As I mentioned, all contributors do have to have their own FSA ID. And so if a contributor doesn't have a social security number, they can still create one. But all contributors do have to create their own FSA ID. You have to have an SSN number for those that do have social security numbers. It has to match exactly as it appears on the social security card. We're going to talk a lot about that here in a minute as well. And each person has to have their own email and phone number. So for parents out there, I know it's tempting to try to do everything for your student, but you have to have your own identified FSA ID, create your own FSA ID in order to submit the FAFSA. So a student has to have their FSA ID and the parent does as well. And gathering information for that, just make sure you have your social security number or alien registration number for non-US citizens. And then if it's a dependent student, which we'll talk about in a minute, at least one contributor has to have an FSA ID as well. You want to pull together any 2023 federal income tax returns. And why is it 2023? The FAFSA for 25-26 uses that 2023 income tax information. So you can collect that. I will mention that you are required to consent to have the federal tax information from the IRS transferred into the FAFSA. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But you still want to probably pull that information together just so you can reference it throughout the time submitting the FAFSA. And you also want to pull any other records of money earned in 2023. And then all untaxed income, if you did have child support or other types of untaxed income that you may have pulled in 2023, you want to get those records together as well. And then access to your banking account, everything that's in your banking account. And then for those of you who have businesses, a farm, you will have to have your net worth of those. If you have investments that you're working with or any other types of assets, and that does not include the home that you live in. So your primary residence would not be included. But if any of those are applicable, you want to pull that information together as well so that you're able to submit that on the FAFSA. Okay, so when we're talking about dependent students, there are some questions on the FAFSA that they ask to determine whether a student is dependent or independent. So if we're talking about contributors for a dependent student, that means a student who must provide their information on the 25-26 FAFSA. And then if their parents are married or living together, whether they're married or not, both parents have to be reported on the FAFSA. So we do have to have both the student and the parent information in that situation for both parents. Now, if the parent is widowed or never married, then only that parent would report information in that situation. And then to continue upon that, if you have parents who are divorced or separated and they do not live together, what the FAFSA requires is you would report the parent who provided more than 50% of financial support in the past 12 months. In that circumstance, if the parents are divorced, it would be the parent who provides more than 50% of the financial support in the last year. Now, if the parent has remarried, in that situation, then the step parent's information must also be included. And that would be the same situation if they were not married in 2023 and they had separate taxes, we would need that tax information for both parents. And so both parents will be a contributor in that scenario. So you're probably wondering, how does the federal government determine dependency status for financial aid purposes? So there are a series of questions on the FAFSA they're basically yes/no answers to the questions, and they will ask you. They are what they call dependency questions. And for federal student aid purposes, if the student answers yes to any of those questions, they are considered independent by the government for financial aid purposes. And it would only be required for the student to be the contributor or a student and spouse if they are married. And in that circumstance, that's the only contributors that would have to report information on the FAFSA. Now, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but be careful. If you answer yes to one of those questions, there may be additional documentation that has to be provided to back up that claim that the student answered yes to that question. So it's not just an automatic, they answer yes and they're automatically considered independent. It's usually a provisionally they would provisionally be independent, and then there may be additional documentation required in that circumstance. So they would really need to be sure that they can answer yes to that question for dependency status. Now, if the answer is no to every question, then for federal student aid purposes, that student is considered a dependent student, and they will have to provide information about their parents or contributors on the FAFSA form. So let's go over a few FAFSA tips. And the main thing that we want to try to avoid for students and families is any kind of error that will delay the FAFSA or delay their financial aid being awarded. Many times we see families submit the wrong age year, or they've submitted a previous age year, assuming they had submitted it for the next academic year. So make sure when you are submitting the FAFSA, it's for the right year. The upcoming year is 2025-26. So make sure when you fill the FAFSA out, you're doing the 25-26 FAFSA. As I mentioned before, they do require all contributors to consent to have their tax information transferred from the IRS into the FAFSA. So if you do not consent, if one contributor does not consent to that piece, then the FAFSA will not be considered valid at that point. Another thing is entering incorrect information. When you're creating an FSA ID, if something is not correct or doesn't match with the Social Security Administration, that will cause a delay. You'll have to go back and fix it. And sometimes that can be really painful. You have to go through a lot of things to get that fixed on the FSA ID. Not listing high school information. When you're submitting the FAFSA, it requires high school information to be submitted on the FAFSA. And so when you're going through that, make sure that the student is putting their high school information on the FAFSA. And this is one that we have it happens to us for a lot of students, sending the FAFSA to the wrong school. We have a ton of students that will send the FAFSA to West Virginia State, which is a completely different school. Or they may send it over to, there's actually a financial aid office at the hospital, which is a completely separate school as well. We only have one FAFSA code 003827. So make sure that the student is submitting the FAFSA to West Virginia University when they submit that. Again, as I mentioned before, if a student answers yes to the dependency status questions and they really shouldn't have, that's going to cause a delay in getting that aid out to them. And again, going back to sending emails and checking the portal, make sure that students are checking that information and obviously relaying for parents, relaying that information to you, especially if you're helping out with the balance it's due way up in August. So make sure that they are checking their email, checking the portal, and making sure they're staying on top of any requirements that we have for them. Okay, so we're talking to West Virginia residents and their financial aid. So state aid for West Virginia is awarded through the Higher Education Policy Commission, and they have a few aid programs that they do offer. We're going to talk about the common types of aid programs that students receive at WVU. And the first one is the Promise Scholarship. Now, we put gift aid on here because scholarships are generally considered what we call gift aid, which means you don't have to typically pay that back. So it's awarded and you don't have to go back and pay it at graduation. But to apply for the Promise Scholarship, there's a couple steps you have to take in order to apply for it. And as you notice, the deadline is quickly approaching. So make sure you're taking care of both of these steps to apply for the Promise Scholarship. The first one is submitting that FAFSA by March 1st. They have a hard deadline this year. In past years, they've been pretty flexible with the deadline, but this year, from what we've heard, they're going to be really steadfast on that March 1st deadline. So make sure you get the FAFSA in by March 1st. And then also go to cfwv.com because you can do the application for the Promise Scholarship there. You go in and create an account in the West Virginia Student Aid Management System, verify your email address, and then you can log in to submit your Promise Scholarship application. So make sure both steps are completed by March 1st. Now, the main rule for residency for the Promise Scholarship is the student and the parent or legal guardian must continuously reside in West Virginia for at least 1 year prior to the application deadline. So that is the rule for the Promise Scholarship in terms of residency eligibility. The other eligibility requirements include having a 3.0 overall high school GPA, which is basically a B average, and then also an overall 3.0 in core course requirements. So the major core course requirements, they have to have an overall 3.0 in those as well. And then they do look at test scores as well. So if you take the ACT, the minimum total score has to be 21. And then also on the subsections, you have to have at least a 19 on math and reading. So make sure that they are getting those, the overall total score, and then also the sub score has to reach a minimum of 19. And then on the SAT, the minimum total score has to be 1080, and then a 510 in each subsection as well. So the max award, and we just learned this recently, but it's the same as the 24-25 academic year. So the max award for next year is going to be $5,500. That is determined each year by HEPC. So they make the determination of the max award for a student each year. The one thing that I will kind of introduce to everyone is degree pursuant coursework. A lot of times that gets confusing for a student as they go through their curriculum. But in order for federal and state aid to be applied to the student's account, they have to be in degree pursuant coursework. And what that means is it has to be a course that's required to complete the degree program. And so for the Promise Scholarship, they have to be full-time each semester in degree pursuant coursework. So that means 12 hours at WVU. So they would have to have 12 hours of degree pursuant coursework. Typically, that's not a problem in the freshman year. but that could be an issue as they get closer to their junior and senior years. But there are also exceptions to that rule as well, that students can reach out to us if they do have questions going through the program. Now, Promise is a tuition-specific scholarship. So if a student has other tuition-specific aids, such as a waiver or other types of aid that they might have, the Promise plus that tuition-specific award cannot exceed their total tuition and fees. And so that it allows it to max it out, but they cannot exceed the tuition and fees. So just keep that in mind. And then also renewal requirements for the Promise Scholarship. It mirrors our actual merit scholarships in terms of what they have to receive to renew. So each year the student has to finish the year with a 2.75 GPA, and then they also have to earn 30 credit hours each academic year. Now, summer can be included on this as well, so keep that in mind. The other type of state aid program that we see commonly awarded to West Virginia residents is the West Virginia Higher Education Grant. This is a FAFSA requirement. In other words, you have to submit the FAFSA to apply for this program. Now, the deadline is April 15th, but I think I've given you a reason to go ahead and submit the FAFSA by March 1st, because you're going to apply for maximum financial aid eligibility if you do that by March 1st. Again, HEPC has told us these deadlines are hard deadlines this year. So make sure that you are submitting everything by the deadlines. This is, again, the student and the parent must continuously reside in West Virginia for 12 consecutive months prior to the application deadline. And they have to be a high school graduate or have earned a high school equivalency diploma. Now, the one thing that is different with this award versus the Promise is that the student does have to demonstrate financial need. And in order to kind of figure out what financial need means, so when you submit a FAFSA, there's a calculation off of a number of different things on the FAFSA. The family size, the adjusted gross income, the assets that the family may have, all of that gets thrown into a calculation called the Student Aid Index. And so when that gets kicked out, we use that in conjunction with the student's overall costs, which include billable and non-billable costs. And then we determine whether the student qualifies for the award or not. Now, the maximum that they can have to receive that award is 13,000. So if the SAI number is 13,001 or higher, they will not qualify for the West Virginia Higher Education Grant. But if they are 13,000 and below, and then they also have enough room in their cost of attendance, they can qualify for the West Virginia Higher Education Grant. Now, for this award, this is basically anyone who's never attended college as a first-time resident. They have to have an overall GPA of 2.0, and then also or pass and approved for a high school equivalency exam. So this is for any first-time freshmen that have never attended college before. You just have to have a 2.0 minimum GPA coming in. So for the award amount for 25-26, that is going to be $3,400 or $3,400 for the 25-26 academic year. Some of you may have had students who had been in school last year at WVU, or perhaps you heard that they got $6,400 in the West Virginia Higher Education Grant last year. That was a one-time increase by the former Governor Justice, and the offer actually returns back to the regular limits for 25-26. Again, this can only be applied to degree pursuant coursework. For renewal requirements, it's a little different than the Promise Scholarship. The student just has to meet a 2.0 overall GPA at the end of each academic year. It does include summer. They also have to earn up to 24 degree pursuant hours each academic year if they receive the award for both semesters. So they do have to reach 24 degree pursuant hours. And that can also include summer as well, if they need to take summer courses to meet that. Just keep in mind, summer financial aid is limited. And so they may have to have some out-of-pocket costs when they go into the summer term. They do have to maintain West Virginia residency throughout enrollment. And then our financial aid office has our own satisfactory academic progress policy. And so Usually, the GPA doesn't factor in, it does sometimes, but the most common thing that we see on the SAP is that the student drops below our completion percentage requirements. If they're dropping too many classes, it may get them suspended for federal and state aid, so keep that in mind as well. So now let's talk a little bit about the WVU scholarships and some of the gift aid programs that we can award to the student for next year. The first is the Climb Higher Scholarship. This is WVU's institutional scholarship it's a merit award. So students are awarded based on merit. Again, it's a gift aid program. And it's also a program that we automatically award. So the student isn't required to do anything beyond the admissions application. You just have to apply and be admitted to WVU. Once we review your academic record for eligibility, we automatically award that. So if your GPA and/or test score qualifies, you're offered the scholarship automatically. We do include weighted GPAs as long as it's provided on the high school transcript when they send it in. It has to be an official high school transcript. And these are renewable as well. The Climb Higher Scholarship has the same renewal requirements as the Promise. They just have to earn 30 credit hours during an academic year, including summer. And then they also have to maintain a 2.75 GPA at the end of each year as well. First-time freshmen must be admitted by August 1st to be considered for this scholarship. So as long as we have all of your information, you've been admitted by August 1st, then we can consider that student for the Climb Higher Scholarship. So let's say you are admitted and your GPA actually goes up later on, or you get a better test score. You can actually submit either an updated high school transcript, official transcript, through our GPA update request form, or you can have your test scores sent. As long as you do that prior to August 1st, you can either, let's say you didn't have the scholarship before and now you qualify, we'll go ahead and automatically award that to you. Or if you're at a level 3 and all of a sudden now you qualify for a level 2, we'll automatically make that adjustment for you. And we just wanted to put the amounts up here. These are the in-state amounts that we'd be looking at, and then what it takes to receive that. If you can't read it, level 4 is a 3.0 to 3.49 GPA. The level 3 is 3.5 to 3.79. Level 2 is 3.8 plus. And then level 1 is the only one that requires test scores. All the other ones is automatically qualified based on the GPA. When you get to the level 1, we do require a test score for that one. So it's a 3.8 GPA and either an ACT of 30 or greater or an SAT of 1380 or greater or 60 or greater. So those are the requirements for our scholarships. As I mentioned before, if you don't qualify for one initially, but you're close, and then you do upgrade that based on your GPA or test scores, you can submit that at a later time as long as it's done before August 1st. So we do have a new program. In case you haven't heard of it, it's called the WVU Guarantee. It is for West Virginia residents only. So students, again, who meet this eligibility by August 1st will automatically be reviewed. And so here are some of the requirements for that. So you must be admitted as a West Virginia resident. It could be any of our campuses, so Morgantown, Beckley, or Kaiser. However, WVU Online students are not eligible for this award. The student has to be degree-seeking student through an undergraduate program, whether that's associate's or bachelor's degree, and it has to be for starting in the fall 2025 semester. This is the one kicker for financial need. The student has to have a household adjusted gross income of $65,000 or less, as reported based on the tax year of 2023, which is what's reported on the FAFSA. And then we also have to have a valid 25-26 FAFSA submitted as well. And so this is an award that you have to complete the FAFSA annually. And so if you are going to qualify for this, make sure that you are completing that FAFSA each year. Some other criteria in terms of how this fund applies to students enrolling in the beginning of the fall 2025. Just keep in mind, all the criteria I mentioned is basically based on students who are starting in the fall. So as we award this for the fall of 2026 and beyond, it may have different criteria or values. So just keep that in mind. The students that are awarded the WVU Guarantee, it is a program that requires degree pursuant coursework. And so they have to be full-time. Again, that we consider that 12 hours. So they have to have 12 hours of degree pursuant coursework to qualify. Probably the most confusing part about this is that it's a last dollar in program. And what that means is we are taking the total tuition and fees assessed for the student, not anything else, just tuition and fees. So it'd be the university. We have 3 different charges that a student has when they are assessed tuition and fees each semester. We have the university tuition, the college tuition, and the university fees. And so that's what we're talking about with this program. It only applies to those costs or those tuition and fees assessed to the student each semester. And so anything that is subtracted out from scholarships and grants, the WVU Guarantee would pick up in the tuition and fees. So other billable charges that could be applied to the student, such as meal plans, residence halls, lab fees. I'm not going to read all of them, but these are all additional things that could be billed to the student. Those are not covered by the WVU Guarantee. So that's an important distinction to remember that this is last dollar in only for the tuition and fees billed to the student each semester. Here are some of the awards that could be subtracted out of tuition and fees. So we have the federal Pell Grant, the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, the West Virginia Higher Education Grant, West Virginia Promise Scholarship, and any other types of institutional scholarships that a student may receive. And so what that means is if a student receives a tuition and fee assessment, and these, let's say their tuition fees are $10,000 and they receive about $8,000 in one of these aid programs or additional aid programs, then the WVU Guarantee would cover $2,000 of the remaining charges of the tuition and fees. So that's kind of how this program will work. It is possible for the student to be covered by all of these on their entire tuition and fees, and then the WVU Guarantee would not apply in that instance. So just keep that in mind. You can use, since it can't be applied to some of those other charges that we mentioned, you can use other types of aid that we'll talk about in a minute. When you submit the FAFSA, the main thing being loans. If a student is offered student loans or parent loans, they can use some of those other aid programs to cover those other charges that might be out there for the student. So now that I've talked a little bit about aid for West Virginia residents, let's talk about other types of aid that the student can receive. As I mentioned before, gift aid is basically aid that the student receives that they don't necessarily have to pay back. There are a few exceptions to that, but most of the time the students don't have to pay this money back. They receive that money and they can use it to pay for educational costs, and then at graduation they don't owe anything. On the other side of that is self-help aid, which is going to be loans and work-study employment. The loans obviously do have to be paid back depending on the terms of the loan. And then work-study employment is basically just a program where a student accepts a work-study award. It is need-based, and they can potentially earn a paycheck to cover costs. So one of the things I mentioned earlier is you know, there are lots of types of gift aid. One of those is obviously scholarships, but one of the things that high school students can do and can kind of go out and do this on their own is search for scholarships. We have a number of different resources that students can look into to try to apply for scholarships. You can check with the high school counselors, local businesses, alumni associations, your churches, nonprofit groups. There potentially could be departmental scholarship awards as a student that's admitted into a degree program. But the one I really want to talk about are the search engines. If you go to our website, which is listed here, the URL address listed above at the top, under search engines, we have about 10 to 12 search engines we have listed on our website. And this is something where a student can take the time, just treat it, if they have 3 to 4 days off and a weekend, treat it like a job. Spend about, I don't know, 4, 6, 8 hours a day during that time off, searching for scholarships. Let's say they can narrow it down to about 100 or 200 scholarship applications that they think they might qualify for, and go out and apply for them. Send them out just like you're applying for a job. And if that student, let's say they send out 100 applications and it takes them 16 hours or whatever, they get awarded $500 or $1,000 scholarship for that next year. That's well worth it to me, because that's you're not going to earn that much getting a job by going out and getting a job in a couple of days. So go out there and search for scholarships. They can get some sort of a private scholarship. We receive checks every semester for students that receive that, and we've even seen examples of students who are in state are able to cover all their charges because they can use some of those other state aid programs plus external scholarships to cover all of their costs each semester. So another type of aid program that we've kind of already talked, we talked about the West Virginia Higher Education Grant, but there are also federal grants that are available to students. Again, these typically do not need to be repaid. They are determined by financial need, so you do have to submit the FAFSA to apply for it. And the first one is the federal Pell Grant. Now, this is for undergraduate students only. It is for students with exceptional financial need. So it will be determined by FAFSA results. Now, the maximum amount from 24-25 was $7,395, but that can vary from year to year based on what the federal government decides to award. We also have the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. We call it the SEOG. Again, you have to submit the FAFSA, and it is based on availability of funds. So this is a little different. The Pell Grant is kind of what we call a first come, first serve award. And again, going back to harping on filling out that FAFSA by March 1st, that March 1st deadline is going to determine eligibility for this award. So make sure that you get that FAFSA in. It is a need-based program, so it is based on students who show the most financial need, that they potentially, whenever they submit the FAFSA, they show the maximum financial need available. But we also look to see when they submitted the FAFSA. So it is a first come, first served program. When we run out of funds, we can't award it anymore. So get that FAFSA in as soon as possible. And I already mentioned this earlier, but there is what we call federal work study. This is also a need-based program, so you have to submit the FAFSA and qualify for this award. But it is a program that allows a student to have part-time employment. I did that as a student when I was in college, and it was extremely helpful. It helped me earn an income while I was in school. Did it for the 4 years I was in undergrad, and was able to pay down a lot of bills during the semester. And it's a really good program. If students qualify for it, they can work up to 28 hours a week. And they can also use that for the resume, so they can put that on a resume. Obviously, they're going to school to get a job, and so they can put that on their resume as well. Helps them with all kinds of indirect costs that maybe not on the bill, but they have to pay for, and they know they have to pay for, and so they can use that paycheck for those costs. And then finally, we also have loans, and I know a lot of families don't consider this financial aid, but it really is. Obviously, when you do borrow a loan, it does have to be repaid with interest. They are going to charge you interest on that. The student loans are going to be borrowed by the federal government or a private lender. So there's a couple types of ways a student can borrow loans. If a student fills out the FAFSA, we're going to automatically offer them a federal loan. If they qualify based on financial need, they can get a subsidized loan. And then they can get up to $5,500 a year in both the subsidized and unsubsidized loan. Now, I will point out there is a significant difference between the subsidized and unsubsidized loan, just so you're aware. And a subsidized loan does not accrue interest while the student remains enrolled half-time in school. So that student borrows $1,000 in their freshman year. When they graduate, they only owe $1,000 as long as they stay enrolled. Whereas an unsubsidized loan, if they borrow that loan, they potentially will be owing more at the end of graduation if they're not paying that interest on the loan, because it does start accruing interest once we disperse the loan to their account. Again, the subsidized loan is need-based, so they do have to qualify for that particular loan. But in the two combined together, the student can be awarded up to $5,500 per year based on their freshman year. Now that amount goes up each year, assuming they matriculate to their fourth year. And so it does increase to $6,500 in their sophomore year, $7,500 in their junior and senior years, assuming they're a dependent student. Now, you're not required to take out loans. We're going to talk about credit-based loans as well, but you're not required to take out the loans. But if you are, you do have a gap between those institutional costs and what you are receiving in aid. You can take out either a student loan or what we're going to talk about in credit-based loans to cover the additional costs. So there are other types of federal loans out there, and that includes the Parent Plus loan. So if the parents do want to help the student, they can borrow a Parent Plus loan to cover some of those costs that they aren't meeting. It is a credit-based loan, and as you can see, the interest rate for 24-25 is really high. We don't have the 25-26 rates. Those won't be available till July 1st. But this is for parents of dependent undergraduate students. The loan is going to be in the parent's name. And you're able to start applying for those usually sometime in May, but that is all done at studentaid.gov. And so if there's a gap between what the student's receiving and what needs to be covered for that academic year, the parent can borrow some funds. Again, if you don't need all of it, just borrow the amount that you need, and then you can pay that off as you go. The parent loans, just like the student loans, can be deferred until they graduate in terms of requiring payment on the loan. But you do have to select that on the loan to be deferred until they do graduate. But you will accrue interest on the loan, so just keep that in mind. So you may want to go ahead and start making some sort of payments, even if you're not required to make payments. And then the other type of credit-based loan would be a private loan. Most of the time, this is going to be in the student's name, but some parents also borrow the loans through private lenders. But this is a loan that's done through a private entity, whether it's a bank or other sort of lender that's out there. You will go out and apply for this separately. If it's a student, they would apply on their own through they actually go through the lender themselves. They can go into their website and apply for the loan. These particular loans, the interest depends on the servicer. So whoever you apply through will determine the interest rate that you get. And it is based on credit. Whenever a student submits the application for the private loan, there is a credit check and they determine the actual interest rate off of that. Now, for incoming freshmen, they're all going to need a cosigner, most likely. So they are going to determine the interest rate off of the student who applies and also whoever is the cosigner on that loan with them. They'll determine the interest rate off of that. Now, the one thing I will point out about these private loans is that they do not typically get certified until later on in the year. So it's going to be after they register for NSO. So if you apply really early, I wouldn't recommend applying too early. But if you're applying in May and haven't gone through NSO, it might be some lag time between that actually gets certified. So just keep that in mind. You can go to our website to go look at, compare some of the lenders that are on there if you go to the website that's listed there. So what do you do to prepare for fall 2025? So going through the next couple of months, mainly just make sure you're getting the application into WVU and make sure you provide your high school transcript and test scores. If you are submitting test scores, make sure you get that into us as soon as possible. Please start working on submitting that 25-26 FAFSA. If you haven't done so already, make sure that's in before March 1st. Monitor. Students have to monitor mixed email for updates. Please monitor that to make sure that you're staying on top of things. As we mentioned earlier, apply for external scholarships that might be available for students. And then be ready to submit additional documents to us. When you submit a FAFSA, it's possible they're going to reach out, send an email and say, hey, we have your FAFSA, but we need some additional documentation. So pay attention to your emails. We may need additional documentation. We'll give you instructions on how to submit that documentation to us so we can make sure we get your aid offer out. And then from May to August, continue to monitor mixed email, the WVU portal. continue to apply for external scholarships. At that point, you'll start to apply for loans if you are interested in loans, especially the credit-based loans, if they are needed. And then any updates to the GPA or test scores, make sure you are submitting that through to the admissions office as well. And that has to be done by August 1st. Please follow us on social media. We are on X, Facebook, and Instagram. So follow us at the WVU Hub. We will provide any updates that might be out there, especially for those parents who maybe your student's not relaying all the information to you. You're able to follow us on these social media sites, and we'll give you updates periodically on things that are happening within WVU and financial aid office. And then this is our contact information. The main thing I will point out is our online assistance that we have listed there, hub.wvu.edu/contact. We have all of our contact information listed there. You can call us as listed below, the 304-293-1988 number. We also have the ability to send a email ticket to our office through that contact page. And we also do Zoom appointments. So if you ever have questions about anything when it relates to financial aid, scholarships, billing, admissions, transcripts, please feel free to set up a Zoom appointment. We'll be happy to meet with you and talk to you about any questions you might have.
Well, thank you very much. So folks, we are ready to take questions. If you have any questions, just drop those in the chat. As you're doing that, I'd just like to remind everyone that we did want you to know about the Mountaineer Parents Club. So the Mountaineer Parents Club does sponsor these webinars. We will bring several more throughout the spring semester here. If you would like to continue getting information from us, please join the Mountaineer Parents Club. It's free. All you have to do is go to our website and fill out that form, and we will send you emails twice a month that have lots of good WVU information in them. We are the primary way that WVU communicates with families, so we don't want you to miss out on anything. And check out our Facebook pages. We have a lot of Facebook pages that we manage, 3 different ones, and especially that official families of the WVU class of 2029. That is where all the incoming families can ask us questions. We will answer them directly, and we get help from our friends at the Hub and housing and everywhere else at WVU. So please do join us. If you need anything or you have questions beyond tonight, you can always email the Mountaineer Parents Club, parentsclub@mail.wvu.edu, and we will get you to the right place. And I see that we have a question, so we are going to get, sorry here, my chat is a little wonky. Here we go. Is the Promise Scholarship eligible for non-WVU residents? This is for a family from Ohio.
Yeah, unfortunately not. It is only for West Virginia residents. And as mentioned before, you had to be, the student and the parents had to be West Virginia residents at least 12 months prior to the application deadline.
However, I do see that you are from Ohio and that the student was admitted into the WVU Business School. So we do have a reciprocity agreement with Ohio for certain School of Business majors. So if you want, you can do a search, just type in WVU Ohio Reciprocity. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 majors who that would qualify that student for the West Virginia resident rates. Now, if you're offered scholarships, unfortunately, you would lose the benefit of those scholarships, but the cost of the tuition and fees for that student would go from the out-of-state amount down to what a West Virginia resident would pay.
Thank you, George. All right. That is the only question I see in here for this evening. Any other questions? Please let us know. We'll give you another minute or 2 to ask us any questions. In the meantime, we will also just remind everyone that the Hub is available to answer all your questions, but the Parents Club can also help get you to the right place. please lean on us as you need different things. We're happy to help.
And I will speak as a parent. I have had one son that just graduated in May, one that will graduate this coming December, and I have a daughter who will be starting next fall, and then one that will start in 18 years. But the Parents Club is very helpful because even when my sons, and I'm sure my daughter will forget to remind me when things are happening. I know Eric mentioned this during the presentation, but that newsletter that is sent out sometimes 2 times a month or more, if something important is happening, those are very critical because, as you heard or may not have heard through FERPA, we are required to communicate with the student. We're not permitted to communicate to you directly on that on the student's individual information. So what the Parents Club does is they circumvent that by saying, okay, financial aid, what's coming up? And so they will say when bills are coming up and due, when the financial aid form is being released, if we have anything that's happening in our office, any scholarships that we're trying to spotlight. So getting that email is great as a parent. Not only do I receive that as a parent, but I forward it to my staff so that everybody at the WVU Hub knows what is happening, not only in our office, but throughout the community at WVU. So it's very informative. It's our way of getting by the individual emails that we're not allowed to send to the parents by sending the generic information of, hey, this is happening, ask your son or daughter about it. So very helpful, very informative, and the Facebook pages as well. And again, when Lisa gets a question that maybe she's not sure of, she will hit us up directly. Eric, Brian, and I work very well with Lisa, and who's listed on here as tech support, which is really Ricky. And they will ask us questions so that we can get as close to an answer as we can for that specific student.
Thank you all. We have a great partnership with our friends at the Hub, so they're always available to answer questions and make things easy. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I hope that means that we've answered all your questions this evening and that we've made it easy for you all. This presentation has been recorded, and we will be posting that not only to the Mountaineer Parents Club website, but we'll go ahead and post it to our Facebook page and make sure that families have access to this information beyond just this tonight. So if you do have questions after this presentation, you can reach out directly to the Hub. You can reach out to the Mountaineer Parents Club, and we will answer your question with our help from the Hub, or we will connect you with them to make sure that you're getting all your questions answered. Keep up with what we have going on because we will have a few more webinars this semester, and we hope to see all of you then. So with that, we will say goodnight and thank you once again.